Hollywood is full of tales, some of which are buried for decades and others of which are told too soon. However, Audrey Meadows' eventual decision to talk about Jackie Gleason caused silent shockwaves in the industry. For many years, she had been recognized as the cool-headed lady who starred opposite one of the noisiest and most erratic celebrities on TV. Audrey, who played Alice Cramden on The Honeymooners, was the calm voice of Jackie Gleason's irascible Ralph, the patient spouse to his irascible bluster. "I truly did mean it, Alice. The record was too small, but I would have said more. But you said enough, Ralph, and I meant every word. I got the notion." There seemed to be an almost perfect synergy between them. However, there was something else entirely, something unsaid, underlying those faultless performances. For decades, Audrey kept the truth to herself, even though she knew it. Her motivations were clear. She could have lost everything if she had spoken up during a time when women in entertainment were frequently expected to remain silent and smile. She also made the long-term decision to preserve the myth for the millions of admirers who still regarded The Honeymooners as comic gold, not just for Jackie. If you're a blabbermouth once, you'll always be one. Ralph, let me tell you something. I appreciate you sending me this song since it has helped me understand your true feelings. She rarely told anyone about it, though, because she had a different story to tell in private. Not among close co-workers, not with fans, and not with the media. Then, at 73, she finally spoke up. She revealed more of herself than ever before in a string of interviews and personal correspondence. And what did she say? It permanently altered the way that people perceived Jackie Gleason. It wasn't a public assault or a dramatic reveal. Though honest, that was never Audrey's style. Powerfully honest, but quietly. Working next to a man who wanted control, whose temper could turn a set into a battlefield, and who, despite his genius, left a lasting impression on those closest to him was what she described. Well, there was plenty of love. But it was a drab area. The light bulbs were dim. Why had she been silent for so long? How did one of the most popular sitcoms on television actually operate behind the scenes? Furthermore, what was Audrey Meadows' actual opinion of the man who was widely recognized as the Great One? The answers start with what audiences never saw, and they may surprise you. During the heyday of television, Audrey Meadows and Jackie Gleason were the ideal contrast for the millions of Americans who watched. She was the shrewd, sensible Alice. He was Ralph, big-hearted and explosive. They worked together to create the sitcom The Honeymooners, which felt incredibly authentic. It was so unvarnished that it almost looked like they were married. However, the reality was much less cozy and much more nuanced. There were indications from the time Audrey joined the cast that things would not be as easy as they appeared on TV. When The Honeymooners went independent, Jackie Gleason was already a big celebrity and wasn't known for getting along with other people. Audrey was actually flatly turned down by Jackie when she tried out. She appeared too refined, in his opinion, to fit the role of a working-class housewife. Only when she had a photographer shoot images of her with her hair disheveled and makeup off, wearing a cheap home coat, did he agree to give her a chance. It was obvious even back then that this would be his show, his way. Had the worst performance in show business, John. The experience was awful. Despite her intelligence, Audrey was aware of the politics involved and was not a pushover. Jackie had complete control over the tone, the script, and the direction. Without his consent, no line was altered. Working with him was like entering a one-man kingdom, where Jackie's voice was the only thing that really counted, as the cast frequently quipped. For Audrey, that meant treading extremely carefully. She needed to be quick-witted, tough, and humorous without being too loud or aggressive to overshadow Jackie or undermine his reign. However, it was precisely this friction between them that made their performances so memorable. Audrey was able to manage herself. In sharp contrast to Jackie's flamboyant demeanor, she possessed a quiet strength, a skill for timing, and a foundation in drama. Real-life frustration gave her the authenticity she needed to deliver those razor-sharp comebacks. Individuals believed they were off camera, yet things couldn't be further from the reality. The two actually didn't talk much unless it was about work. After the lights went out, there were no hearty meals or laughter. The emotional toll also started to accumulate over time. People believe that we have chemistry because we liked each other, Audrey told a friend in a rare occasion. Because we didn't, it worked. The meticulously constructed illusion that viewers witnessed concealed the tension that was seething under the surface. And Audrey found it more and more difficult to keep up that illusion as the Honeymooners' fame soared. However, if she found it challenging, the subsequent part of her life would drive her even closer to the brink. Behind-the-scenes workers were not amused at all by Ralph Cramden's exaggerated tirades and theatrical gestures, but audiences were. Not in a good way. Jackie Gleason's rage was notorious. An atmosphere of tension, uncertainty, and silent fear pervaded his workplace, fueled by the same intensity that propelled his legendary performances. Audrey Meadows compared it to walking a tightrope. Without any safeguards. Jackie insisted on total authority over all production-related matters. Scenes, no matter how clumsy, were frequently shot in a single take because he did not think much practice was necessary. A person's reaction could be explosive if he missed a cue or fumbled a line. Several members of the cast and crew claimed that Jackie would suddenly strike out, and that the entire set would become silent. Even though the poor guy doesn't have much talent, he never gives up. Years later, one crewman described it. You sensed it in the atmosphere. Everyone would tighten the moment Jackie entered. You simply never knew what he would be feeling. The terror permeated everything. Directors used caution. Authors were submissive. Actors, particularly Audrey, have to be cautious around his moods. An argument that starts out small could escalate into a brawl. An informal suggestion could be greeted with outright animosity. Audrey did her best to handle it with grace. She handled everything professionally. Patient and well-prepared. However, she was not exempt from Jackie's anger. There were times when he would critique her performance in front of the entire cast, refusing to look at her in between scenes, and then the following day, he would act as if nothing had occurred. It was a roller coaster of manipulation of emotions. And it was subtly draining for someone like Audrey, who held structure and respect in high regard. In private, she acknowledged that she frequently felt like she had to tread carefully. An entire shoot might be ruined by a single slip-up, or worse, a lasting falling out. Still, she remained. She did it because she believed in the task, not because she wanted to. She refused to let Jackie's actions deprive her of her own performance since she understood the Honeymooners were something special and someone that people genuinely loved. She had no one to complain to without jeopardizing her work, and there was no official support system in place. She quietly endured it, convincing herself that it would all be worthwhile in the end. In her heart, though, she knew the price was already mounting. Even Audrey Meadows, who had maintained her poise for so long, had a breaking point, a time when it no longer seemed honorable to be silent. The public perceived Audrey Meadows as unflappable. Her persona on the Honeymooners was shrewd, calm, and always had the final say. She performed a similar job in real life, but with far greater stakes. He also happens to be a gentleman, and it appears that you have completely forgotten that. Audrey had a burden that few people were aware of off-camera. Even though working with Jackie Gleason was emotionally taxing, she never showed it. Not during interviews, public gatherings, or even when prodded by reporters who are eager to spread rumors. The truth was well concealed behind her composed facade. She wasn't only trying to protect herself. Audrey was aware of the significance the Honeymooners held for others. Working-class families had something to chuckle about after a long day thanks to the show. It was humorous, realistic, and relatable. She was also worried that the illusion might be destroyed if the curtain was raised. She thereby defended the myth rather than speaking out. Her smile came on her face. When she spoke, she thanked Jackie. And she didn't share her deeper emotions. The emotional toll, however, was growing behind closed doors. Family members and acquaintances claim that Audrey frequently confided in them about how challenging the workplace was. She talked about the intense loneliness that resulted from acting as though nothing was wrong, Jackie's erratic mood swings, and the stress of never knowing how each day would turn out. There were times when she thought about leaving, but it was difficult to turn down a national smash. She was urged to stay by CBS officials, who understood her importance to the show and reminded her that their relationship was like lightning in a bottle. Audrey's choice to remain silent was a calculated move rather than a sign of weakness. She was aware of the time she was in. Actresses in the 1950s who spoke their opinions were frequently called difficult, and their careers soon came to a standstill. Audrey was determined to avoid such situation. Thus, she persevered, adjusted, and fulfilled her role both on and off screen. Nevertheless, she never fully recovered from the emotional burden of those years. She threw herself into various endeavors following the wedding, frequently selecting positions that offered her greater stability and creative freedom. Friends claimed that she was still affected by her time spent working with Jackie Gleason, even after several decades had passed. When his name was spoken, Audrey would occasionally become silent, according to a close friend, her face slightly tensing as if recalling something she had tried so hard to forget. Although it came at a personal cost, she continued to be devoted to the program and its heritage. She also started to question if it had been the proper decision to preserve those secrets as time passed. Her ultimate motivation to speak up was not resentment. Clarity was the answer. Audrey was finally prepared to speak the truth at the age of 73. She wants to take back her position in the past, not destroy it. Audrey Meadows contemplated for decades before deciding to finally reveal what had been bothering her. Long after the crowd had finished applauding and the lights had gone out, she opened up in a way she had never done before at the age of 73. There weren't any controversial book tours or eye-catching interviews, just candid moments interspersed with personal letters, late career interviews, and a memoir that spoke a lot without using words. Audrey finally gave herself permission to talk openly about Jackie Gleason. Not just the actor, but the man who puts on the show. Even though she didn't intend to ruin his legacy, she also didn't sugarcoat the facts. She called him a bully as well as a genius. A man whose brilliance glowed on the screen, yet whose absence from the camera might be oppressive. "I'm sorry, John." Indeed, she remembered times when his anger would suddenly flare up, when the atmosphere on set became icy with fear, and when she felt more like a prop than a companion. "Could be charming and generous one moment and unbearable the next," she stated in a rare interview. The fact that she never knew which Jackie she would meet on each given day was taxing, she said. He occasionally gave sincere, kind compliments on her performance. Sometimes he would yell at her over something insignificant, or he would completely ignore her. For the purpose of the show, she had to endure that emotional whiplash in silence, and it became a part of her routine. Her comments were powerful because they were restrained. Audrey didn't enjoy bringing others down. She presented the truth without retaliation or anger. It was based on real-world experience. She recognized the importance of Jackie to others. Although she had seen crowds light up whenever his name was said, she was also aware that every great guy has a silent person taking in the harm he has caused. She stated in her memoir that although we produced history, there was a cost. She paid the price in years of feigning happiness, self-censorship, and emotional weariness. However, by finally speaking up, she allowed herself and innumerable others to share their tales without worrying about criticism or rejection. Her remarks altered the perception of the Honeymooners among fans. People realized for the first time that the enchantment of the program was based on conflict rather than friendship. And if the nostalgia may have been muddled by that realization, it also gave a long black and white story more nuance. Audrey, however, was not finished. Few had ever seen the aspect of Jackie and herself that she unveiled as she continued to peel back the layers. The fundamental basis of American television bears the imprint of the Honeymooners. It is frequently hailed as classic, memorable, and masterfully composed. Most fans were unaware, however, that something considerably more brittle than flawless performances or storylines drove its enduring influence. It was tense. Tension between two people who shared a screen but never really trusted each other was genuine, unsolved, and ongoing. The exacting personality of Jackie Gleason did not only affect Audrey Meadows. His moods were frequently avoided by writers, stagehands, and even producers. However, Audrey, his on-screen spouse, bore the brunt of it. In order to keep her composure and be prepared for the camera, she had to absorb his frequent mood fluctuations, deliver sharp humorous lines without making him feel proud, and equal his intensity without overpowering him. Her part, in many respects, involved much more than just acting. Emotional stamina was needed. Audrey would eventually think back on that dynamic with a mixture of sadness and clarity. Though not because they were attracted to one another, she acknowledged that their on-screen chemistry was indisputable. It was because they were responding to the friction underneath the surface all the time. Jackie remained vigilant because she was unpredictable. His anarchy was anchored by her ordered, composed performance. Fans saw what they thought was lighthearted banter as a very real tug-of-war between two strong forces with diametrically opposed morals. She never made Jackie seem untalented. Quite to the contrary, she frequently referred to him as one of the most innately talented actors she had ever hired. She did, however, add that his genius came at a high price. One minute he might be toasty, the next he might be freezing. His line was just right to make her chuckle. Only hours later, to chastise her privately after a small argument. Because of such mental instability, every day of filming felt risky. Ironically, though, it was precisely this conflict that contributed to the show's historic status. The reality that fans loved was a result of the raw energy, the slightly strained delivery, and the sensation that anything could happen at any time. There was unsaid tension in their scenes, in addition to the humor. And it seemed genuine because of it. Too authentic. Their performances worked because we were never close enough to be comfortable, Audrey once remarked. One's perspective of the entire series is altered by this statement. A delicate balance between trust and self-defense, might and restraint, was what appeared to be flawless casting. The performance was like lightning in a bottle. However, someone had to keep the bottle steady, regardless of how heavy it got, in order to catch that lightning. Audrey continued to feel the effects of that performance long after the cameras had stopped rolling. In the end, her private baggage will influence how she bid farewell to Jackie in a whole phase of her life. When Jackie Gleason died in 1987, people all throughout the nation sent condolences. His timing and presence helped establish the whole concept of television humor, and he was hailed as a pioneer and a unique talent. However, Audrey Meadows found that his death sparked something far more intricate and intimate. Silently and politely, she went to his funeral. She said goodbye to a man who had formerly been the focus of her professional life, and quietly, without making any big announcements or making headlines for her appearance. Later, in interviews with close friends, Audrey acknowledged that she had a weird sense of calm when she said farewell. "I've forgiven him, but I never forget," she said. She had never said anything aloud, yet that one sentence encapsulated it. Memory did not soften the past, and forgiveness did not take away the hurt. In her later years, however, Audrey opted for introspection over bitterness. She never made an effort to change the past. She tried to understand it instead. From a professional standpoint, she acknowledged that the Honeymooners offered her a position in the history of television. Doors were opened. It brought her enduring notoriety. But for me, the encounter left wounds that would not go away with time. She once admitted to a family member that she gave her all for the part. Other than mental tranquility. Neither in retirement nor during her acting career did that strain completely go away. She always discussed Jackie in public with calm elegance. She would appreciate his contribution to comedy, commend his skill, or reminisce about a humorous scene on set. A lifetime of emotional calculation, however, lay beneath that elegance. Audrey understood the importance of her appearance. If she had spoken too quickly, the focus would have turned from her work to the drama around it. Consequently, she waited. Her words were carefully chosen, and she was always conscious of their impact. By the time she started to talk more openly in her 70s, things had changed. After a prolonged period of silence, people were now open to hearing about the experiences of women. At a period when speaking up carried severe implications, her voice joined an increasing chorus of artists, authors, and performers who had faced similar difficulties. Did her narrative have any redeeming qualities? Well, maybe. She survived long enough to speak the truth on her own terms and be remembered as a woman who had adapted to, endured, and outlasted one of the most challenging working relationships in the history of television. Was anything regretted? Possibly. Audrey, however, never let that to define her. She had come to know how to breathe in both agony and pride. And in doing so, she established her own legacy, one based on quiet tenacity as much as on performances. For a large portion of her life, Audrey Meadows carried the burden of someone else's legacy. She participated in its construction, defense, and performance. When she did eventually come clean, it wasn't to destroy that legacy. Regaining her voice within it was the goal. Her disclosure of Jackie Gleason was intended to balance the record, not to shock or scandalize. Since her narrative had not been told for decades, only one had. She demonstrated to the world that sometimes there is a hidden cost to on-screen greatness. That there might be bruises hidden behind the giggling and cheering. Her truth was not one of revenge. Everything was about coming to terms with everything and eventually letting the silence go. Ultimately, Audrey's choice to speak up was a silent act of courage. Her truth was not screamed. After a lifetime of being told to keep quiet, she finally whispered it. In doing so, she served as a reminder to everyone that even the most talented performers may be overdriven. That honesty is important even if it comes decades later, and that dignity does not imply silence. We shall never forget Jackie Gleason as the Great One. He was unquestionably brilliant. However, Audrey also reminds us that grandeur is not always compassionate and that genius does not justify cruelty. She demonstrated to us that the human tales behind the celebrity never stop changing, even when the limelight goes away. They breathe, they become deeper, and they should be heard. As viewers, it is simple to romanticize the heyday of television as a simpler, more carefree era. As Audrey eventually disclosed, however, the reality is much more nuanced. Even the most adored stars were frequently fighting demons just out of frame, and the settings were not always happy or the partnerships equitable. It was not simply lines and laughter that Audrey Meadows left behind. She left a lesson behind. Not all silence is a good thing. It can be liberating to speak the truth on your own terms, and sometimes the most impactful performances are those that take place behind the scenes. Millions of people believed they already knew the story, but her voice, clear and steady even in her 70s, became the last chapter. And Audrey Meadows did something that, at the height of her stardom, she had never been permitted to do in that last act. She assumed the lead role not as a character but as herself.